Hello and welcome to Book Nook. My name is Mary Kay Bond and I'm the Executive Director of Read Aloud West Virginia. I'm delighted that we have with us today Crystal Good, a native West Virginian who is a poet and president of her own company. And Crystal, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Excited. Yes.
Well, we're thrilled that you could be here today. Now, I've said that you're a native of West Virginia. You're from St. Albans?
St. Albans, yes.
Okay. And you are the president of your own company, and that company is?
Mixed Media.
So that's pretty exciting.
It is exciting.
Now, as we were chatting before the program started, you were telling me that you've always loved the sound of language, and you have written poems of your own.
Yes, I've been writing since I was a young girl, elementary school, I remember, as soon as I could hold a pencil.
Now, I know that you're currently doing readings around the world. You mentioned Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, I was in Abu Dhabi last year, and I had a reading. I read poetry there, and any chance I get, whether it's a big stage, little stage, a bar, a library, anywhere, I'm happy to read and share poetry. I really love the genre.
That's wonderful. Well, clearly, someone who loves language the way you do was an avid reader, I would think.
Yes.
I know that you don't like, from our conversation before, that you don't like to choose favorites, but maybe you could share with some of our viewers some of your favorites growing up, some of the books that really stick in your mind.
Yeah, when you asked that question, I just had to think about, and I went straight to my elementary school library and my librarian and the card catalog, and and the place that I always went to was the Judy Blume collection, right? So I'm sure I read every Judy Blume book, Super Fudge, that there was, and I can't remember, there may have been some controversial language or maybe this discussion around divorce or something that was in those books that made it seem so a bit grown up for me to be reading, but I just fell in love with reading, and one of my favorite things, the library, is I remember the summer reading program, and one of my proudest moments was that I read the most books for that summer at the St. Albans Library. And I think they did something where they put like footprints or some, every book that you read, you got like a paw print or something that went across the library, and it was just one of my proudest moments to read the most books of anyone that summer, yes.
Well, in the last 2 days, I've just spoken to two people who mentioned the summer reading program
really?
and how important it is.
Yes.
And we really encourage families to take advantage of the summer reading programs offered by their libraries, a valuable resource, because we do know, based on research, that children will sometimes lose ground in their reading skills just by not utilizing them, by not being in school. So even though there's snow on the ground as you and I speak, it's not too early to begin thinking about those summer reading programs.
Never.
Well, now you have written poetry, and I understand that you've brought some poetry to share with us today in honor of Black History Month.
Yes, February Black History Month, and excited to share some of my favorite poets, African American poets, and these books are also visually poetry to me, coupled with African American painters. So with Romare Bearden, I'm excited to share. These are some of the books that I have three sons that have been a part of their life, and also the ones that I've read to their classrooms. Of course, I don't get to do that anymore because they're much older. But these books are definitely a part of my life and my family's life.
Well, and the rhythm of the language, I think, intrigues children of all ages. One of the things that we work on is encouraging families to begin, when they bring their baby home from the hospital, to read nursery rhymes and to help children get into the flow of language and to build their word toolbox. Now, what's the first book you're going to share with us today?
I'm going to read I Live in Music. It's a poem by Ntozake Shanyi, and paintings coupled with Romare Bearden. It's called I Live in Music.
Well, I thank you for being with us, and I look forward to hearing your
Thank you so much.
selections.
Thank you. I Live in Music, poem by Ntozake Shanyi, paintings by Romare Bearden. I live in music. Is this where you live? I live here in music. I live on C-sharp Street. My friend lives on B-flat Avenue. Do you live here in music? Sound falls round me like rain on other folks. Saxophones wet my face. Cold as winter in St. Louis. Hot like peppers I rub on my lips thinking they was lilies. I got 15 trumpets where other women got hips. And an upright bass for both sides of my heart. I walk round in piano like somebody else be walking on the earth. I live in music, live in it, wash in it. I could even smell it, wear sound on my fingers, sound falls so full of music. You could make a river where your arm is and hold yourself. Hold yourself in music. I live in music. Is this where you live? I live here in music. I live on C-sharp Street. My friend lives on B-flat Avenue. Do you live here in music? Sound falls round me like rain on other folks. Saxophones wet my face, cold as winter in St. Louis. Hot like peppers I rub on my lips, thinking they was lilies. I got 15 trumpets where other women got hips, an upright bass for both sides of my heart. I walk round in piano like somebody else be walking on the earth. I live in music, live in it, wash in it. I could even smell it. Wear sound on my fingers, sound falls so full of music. I could make a river where your arm is and hold yourself in a music. Salt in His Shoes, Michael Jordan, In Pursuit of a Dream, by Dolores Jordan with Rosalind M. Jordan, illustrated by Kadir Nelson. Michael loved to play basketball. Every Saturday, he followed his older brothers, Larry and Ronnie, to the park, hoping that they would let him play. And if one of the guys who usually played with them didn't show up, they always did. But there was one problem. His name was Mark, and he was the tallest boy on the court. "What's the matter, Mikey? Too short?" Mark flapped his arms in Michael's face. "Over here," shouted Larry. But when Michael threw the ball, Mark's long arms came out of nowhere and knocked the ball away. It flew onto the hands of a player on Mark's team. He made the basket, and the game was over, just like that. "I'm real sorry, guys. If I was taller, that wouldn't have happened." All the way home, Michael apologized, even though no one was mad. His older brother, Ronnie, tried to cheer him up. "Look, little brother, you played a good game today. Don't worry, we'll win next time." When they got home, Michael went into the kitchen where his mama was cooking dinner. He was still disappointed, and she could tell. "You guys lost again today, huh?" Michael nodded. He sat quietly for a minute, then said, "Mama, how can I grow taller?" Now, Mama knew the answer to a lot of questions, but this was a tough one. She thought for a moment as she sprinkled salt and pepper on the chicken she was making for dinner. Then she smiled, looked at Michael, and said, "Salt." "Salt?" Michael looked at his mama. "Salt in your shoes. We'll put salt in your shoes and say a prayer every night. Before you know it, you'll be taller," she replied. "Salt in my shoes," Michael said quietly to himself. Surely Mama was teasing. He sat staring out the window, trying to figure out how salt was going to help him grow. He noticed the rose bushes outside in Mama's garden. They had grown high along the fence, and roses of all colors were blooming on the vines. He thought to himself, "I remember when Mama first planted those bushes." Michael's face lit up. "If Mama knows how to grow those rose bushes taller, then maybe she's right. Maybe salt in my shoes really will help me grow." Growing more excited, Michael twirled around and started asking lots of questions. "Mama, how long will it take? And how tall do you think I'll get?" Smiling, Mama sat down next to him and explained, "In order for this to work, the most important thing you have to do is be patient and listen to what I tell you and say your prayers every night." Listening carefully, Michael shook his head and said, "Okay, Mama, I'll be patient. But what does saying my prayers have to do with it?" "Everything," Mama replied, and she hugged him. "Now go wash up and tell your brothers and sisters to get ready for dinner." Michael dashed out of the kitchen, almost knocking over his father, who was walking in. "What's he up to now?" asked Daddy. "Oh, the usual," laughed Mama. "Chasing the dream." Later, during dinner, Mama noticed that Michael was barely eating anything. He was already daydreaming about being taller. "Michael, first things first. You won't grow if you don't eat, especially your vegetables," Mama said. "But I'm not really hungry," he said. Raising her eyebrows, Mama gave him a stern look. Slowly, Michael picked up his fork and began to eat. Minutes later, his plate was clean and he was asking for more. That evening at bedtime, Michael set his favorite game shoes on the floor next to the growth chart hanging on the wall. Then he put his pajamas and said his prayers and jumped into bed. When Mama came in, Michael was fast asleep. By the look on his face, she could tell he was already playing basketball in his dreams. Standing by his bed, Mama sprinkled salt in his shoes. Then she prayed quietly over him as she did all her children. "Dear God, please help Michael to be the best that he can be and to give his best in all that he does. And Lord, could you please make him just a little bit taller tomorrow than he is today? Thank you. Amen." After that night, Michael wore his favorite game shoes everywhere he went, even to church. And he stopped going to the park with his brothers on Saturdays. Instead, he stayed home and practiced. He wanted to grow a few more inches before he went back to the park. After 2 months of practicing and waiting patiently and praying, Michael stood next to the growth chart on his wall. Nothing. He hadn't grown an inch. He was disappointed, but he didn't stop believing. "I've just got to give it time, like Mama said," Michael thought to himself, and that's what he did. 2 more months of practicing went by and still nothing. Now Michael was becoming a little bit sad. Not only had he not grown 1 inch, but he also missed playing basketball with Larry and Ronnie. About the only thing he did miss was being picked on by Mark. When the next Saturday came, his brothers tried to get Michael to go with them to the park. But he wouldn't budge. Mama had begun to worry. When she saw Michael sitting alone on the steps, she said to Daddy, "Maybe you should go out and talk to him." So Daddy went out and sat with Michael. "What's wrong, son? You haven't been to the park with your brothers for a while now. Are you okay?" Michael didn't say anything at first. Then he looked at Daddy and said, "I thought it would be at least a few inches taller by now. I did everything Mama told me to do, but nothing's happened." "Michael, why do you want to be taller?" Daddy asked. "If I were taller, I'd be a great player, and I could help our team win," Michael answered. "But you are a great player, son. And you already have everything it takes to be a winner right here." Daddy tapped Michael on his chest. "Being taller may help you play a little better, but not as much as practice, determination, and giving your best. Those are all the things that make you a real winner." Michael thought about what Daddy said for a minute. Then suddenly he jumped up and took off. "Where are you going?" Daddy yelled after him. "I've got a game today and I'm late," Michael yelled back. When Michael reached the park, the game had started. He sat on the bench hoping he would get a chance to play, and he did. The game was almost over and the score was tied when John, one of the guys on Michael's team, fell and hurt himself. Here was Michael's chance. Michael joined the team in the huddle as they gathered on the sideline for a timeout. "Okay, the game is tied. All we need is 1 point. Who wants to take the shot?" Ronnie asked. He looked in Michael's direction. Feeling more confident than ever, Michael said, "I'll do it." When the whistle blew and the game began, Mark began to pick on Michael as usual. "Still trying to play with the big boys, huh?" Mark taunted. But Michael paid him no attention. Taller or not, he had been practicing, and today he was determined to win. Larry threw the ball inbounds to Michael. Michael caught it, bounced it for a moment, and then took off running. As he approached Mark, Michael shifted to his right. Mark followed, but while he was shifting, Michael spun to his left. He stepped behind Mark and shot. The ball arched far above his opponent's hands and fell silently through the hoop. 2 points. The game is over. Michael's team had won. It was just as Michael had dreamed. When he realized what he had done, Michael took off running and didn't stop till he reached home. Bursting through the door, he shouted, "I did it, Daddy! I did it! I shot right over the tall guy's head and we won the game!" Running in behind him, Ronnie and Larry joined the celebration. "That's right, little brother. You did it. You won the game for us." Michael remembered the look that Ronnie gave him during the last time out of the game and said, "No, we won the game, but I was the star." They all laughed. After that day, Mama stopped putting salt in Michael's shoes. But Michael did not stop being patient and working hard and praying. So that must be what made Michael Jordan grow to be a 6'6" tall basketball superstar. Life Doesn't Frighten Me. Poem by Maya Angelou. Paintings by Basquiat. Shadows on the wall, noises down the hall. Life doesn't frighten me at all. Bad dogs barking loud. Big ghosts in a cloud. Life doesn't frighten me at all. Mean old Mother Goose, lions on the loose, they don't frighten me at all. Dragons breathing flame on my counterpane, life doesn't frighten me at all. I go boo, I make them shoo, I make fun, way they run. I won't cry, so they fly, I just smile, they go wild. Life doesn't frighten me at all. Tough guys fight all alone at night. Life doesn't frighten me at all. Panthers in the park, strangers in the dark. No, they don't frighten me at all. That new classroom where boys all pull my hair, kissy little girls with their hair in curls, they don't frighten me at all. Don't show me frogs and snakes and listen for my scream. If I'm afraid at all, it's only in my dreams. I've got a magic charm that I keep up my sleeve. I can walk the ocean floor and never have to breathe. Life doesn't frighten me at all, not at all, not at all. Life doesn't frighten me at all. Henry's Freedom Box by Ellen Levine, illustrated by Kadir Nelson, who also illustrated the Michael Jordan book that we read earlier. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in the bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe master would set him free. But master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. He did not tear that tobacco leaf. The boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came to the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the market. Were just sold at the slave market, Henry." "No," cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco," the boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves were tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked at his family. "Father, father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her at the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy, too, was gone. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work at night. He ate supper. He went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky. And Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early in the next days at the empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and hope," Henry said. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." Henry would be delivered to a friend's in Philadelphia. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up, with care." Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitrola. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hands. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. The sun was not up yet when Henry climbed into the box. "Ready?" he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed a paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again, upside down. He heard waves and splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst. But he was afraid to move. Somebody might hear him. "I'm tired of standing," someone said. "Why don't we move that box and sit on it?" said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side. Now he was on his left. And suddenly, right side up. "What do you think is in here?" said the first man. "Mail, I guess." "I am mail," thought Henry. But not this kind, but not the kind they imagine. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a rail car. This time, head up. He fell asleep due to the rattling song of the train wheels. He awoke to a loud knocking. "Henry, are you all right in there?" "All right," he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Box Brown.
You can read Henry's Freedom Box, A True Story from the Underground, from your local library, and I hope that you do. You can find all the books that we shared on Book Nook today at your local library. And I'd like to share one thing from Miss Maya Angelou, who says her advice to writers and to everyone is to read everything possible, be it African American, European, Latin, or other literature, especially Shakespeare, but to please read everything possible. And I agree with Miss Maya Angelou that reading is important and that everyone should be reading. Please visit your local library. I'm Crystal Good. Thank you so much for having me on Book Nook today.